Hello, my name is Eric Agori, and in this video we're going to cover how to call Python from C++ using Visual Studio. I'll cover a little bit of how to install Visual Studio, a little bit more on how to install Python. Here's a link. I'll give these links. I'll get them to you some other way. I know it's hard to catch these links in a video. But the goal here is to call Python from C++. So it's very important that you make sure that you actually have Visual Studio as opposed to Visual Studio Code. A lot of students get that wrong. You cannot do this with Visual Studio Code. You need the full Visual Studio IDE. That link I provided in the other slide will actually take you right to this page and start downloading the installer. The version of Visual Studio that you use shouldn't matter. In this particular case, I'm using 2019, but that should not matter. So go ahead and download that and get it installed, and then we'll start installing Python. So now in this video, we're going to go ahead and use Python 64. If you've already got Python installed on your machine, you don't need to install a different version. It doesn't need to be Python 3, but whether you're using Python 32 or 64, we can accommodate that later on in some settings. But in this case, I'm going to go through with Python 64, and I just downloaded whatever the latest was at this time, which was 3.10.4. So notice here that this is the Python I'm installing is 64-bit. Again, the Python version isn't as important. What's very important is that you note where Python's getting installed. You will need this information. So take a note on where Python's getting installed. It tells you right there when it's installing. Now, if you're not installing a new version of Python, you'll have to find your Python installation. There's a good chance it's in the same place as this install. So you might be able to use the data on the next slides. Otherwise, you have to find your Python. And the way to do that actually would be to search your computer for Python.h. So the goal here is to actually, we're going to take a look at the Python, what Python installed and where it's at. And to do that, we're going to use File Explorer. Again, this is Windows. This is and this video is being created on Windows 10, so this is Windows 10. And all you need to do is right-click on the little start icon in the lower left corner, then select File Explorer, or you may already have a File Explorer icon in your Start menu, and that icon will be that little folder. So go ahead and open up File Explorer. So the location of these files and these directories is critical to getting this to work, and this is where most students make an error. So in this case, I've installed Python 3.10, and Python installs in this very weird directory. It's pretty deep. I'm not sure why it installs there by default, but you'll notice, again, on your PC, chances are, unless you changed it, Python saved at the same default location. So just change the name from Eric Agori to whatever your name is, and then of course, and you should be able to find it in that same relative location. Of course, you may not be Python 3.10. Your version of Python might be something different. If it's Python, if it's 32-bit Python, it'll say Python like 39-32. It'll have a -32. So the directories here. So in this directory, you please take note of of that include folder, that libs folder, and those two DLLs that are highlighted here. You will need to come back to this while you're setting up the project in Visual Studio. So go ahead and open, actually take note of the icon that you have on your PC. The icon for Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio looks similar. I found a bunch of different icons online. This is what Visual Studio looks like. It's this purple infinity symbol, I guess. Make sure you select the right one. Again, Visual Studio Code will not work for this video or for this project. So what you want to do is when you open Visual Studio, it should pop up this window here, and what you want to do is you want to create a new project. So select Create a New Project. So the next step is to select Console App. That's what we're doing. We're building a console app. And when you select that, it'll highlight, and then select Next. So when naming a project in Visual Studio, it'll actually let you name it almost anything. But what I've found with previous students is if you add a space in the project name, or you add a plus sign in the project name, it'll accept it, but then it'll fail later on, and it'll be really hard to solve why it failed. So your best bet is just to avoid those symbols altogether. Just use upper, lowercase, use camel notation, and give it a project name. In this case, I gave it CPP Python. Make sure you got that checkbox checked, and then select Create to create your project. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our project. We're going to create a new project. And we want to create a console app. So we highlight that and select Next. And we're going to call this CPP with Python. Now remember, you want to avoid having any symbols in here if you can. Definitely avoid spaces and things like plus signs. Make sure that this is checked off here. And we're going to go ahead and create our project. Okay, so let's make this a little smaller so we can see it. Let's see, this is a little bit more difficult. Here we go. Let's see, I can't get it to get smaller here. I can't get it to get smaller. Okay, so I gotta figure that out. Man, I wish I could edit these. Unfortunately, I can't edit these. There we go, got it. Sorry about that. Okay. The screen recorder sort of messes with the cursor. Okay, so there we go. Now we got it. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to expand this output window down here so you can see it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and build it. So here's our project. There's some sample source code in here. This is just a simple hello world. So let's go ahead and build it, and let's take a look at what's going on. So first we're going to notice, see this debug and this x86, these are incredibly important for this project. These have to be set up right. So I'm going to set this to release right away. And I'm going to leave it on x86 for now, just to show you what's going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to just build this hello world program. So we're going to select build solution. And you can see some stuff going on down here. And this is what's really important. So you got to make sure it says 1 succeeded. And if you look closely, it actually tells you exactly where the exe file is. That's probably one of the #1 questions I get from students is, where's the exe file? Well, it tells you right there. Now if it doesn't tell you, so let's go ahead and make an error here. Error, so we're just going to force an error, and we're going to go ahead and build now. And you can see it says 1 failed, and obviously it doesn't say anything about where the exe is. So if you don't pass the build, you won't get an exe. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and delete that, and let's keep this at release x86. And then I want to show you this. Okay, so if you highlight the project, so I just left clicked on the project name there, and then right click right there, it opens up this little window here, and select Open Folder in File Explorer. So that's the next question I get, is students can't find where their project is. Well, this is how you find that. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make this smaller so it all fits in the screen here. Okay. So here we go with the, here's our project. So you can see here's our CPP Python right there. So the question was, where's the executable? So let's go ahead and do a build again. Build solutions. And where's the executable? It's in Python release. So we go to release, and sure enough, right there is the executable. Now what's important is, notice that the executable is in a directory called release. And notice up here it says release. That matters. This pull down right here actually told the tool what directory to put the executable in. So if I change this to debug, and then I do a build, again I'm going to verify that it builds successfully, and sure enough, if you look, it says debug exe. So there and there, my debug just popped up. So now if I look in there, there's my exe. So let's go ahead and take a look at what does this x86 thing do here. Well, this lets you select x86, which is 32-bit, or x64, which is of course 64-bit. So let's watch what happens to our directory over here when we build this. So build solution, and look at that, my x64 pops up, and then notice how this says debug. So if I go into x64, I go into debug, there's my executable, and again it tells me right here. So these options here, one of the things they do is they determine where the build occurs in the directory structure. Obviously, the other thing they're doing is they're setting different build parameters, which is going to be important later on. As a matter of fact, I'm going to leave it on x64. I'm going to go back to here to release. I just want to show you one more thing here. Okay, so now we're on x64 release, and I'm going to put that, what I'm going to do is go into x64, and oh, there's no release. Okay, so let's go ahead and build. Let's get it in there. So when we build, there the release pops up. Release, there's our executable. So now I'm going to delete the executable, and I'm going to put an error in here. And now when I build, the build's going to fail. So you see it failed, and notice there is no executable. So again, when you're looking for your executable, first of all, make sure your build succeeded, and then just check it tells you exactly where to put the executable, and then use that right click here where you do a right click and go to Open Folder in File Explorer, and you should have no trouble finding your executable or your source code or anything like that. And keep in mind these settings. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and fix this again. So now we know where everything is. So we build solution, and it succeeded, and my release my executable popped up right here. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Python install. So here is my Python install. This directory, again, this was the default directory when I did the install. So what's important to know about this is that, for one, make sure you're looking at the right version of Python. This is Python 3.10. It should be 64-bit for this video, but if you're using 32-bit, it'll say -32. And here's the DLLs that you're going to need. So they're in basically the root directory. Here's the include directory that you're going to need. And here's the libs directory you're going to need. So now if you look in includes, there it goes. If you look in includes, you'll find the let's see, it should be Python.h. Where is it? There it is. Python.h. So that's in there. That's going to be important later. And then if you look in the libs directory, these are libraries that are going to be important later. And then there are the DLLs that are going to be important later. Okay, so now for the next step, I'm going to cut and paste some code in here, but we're going to do that in the next slide video, in the next video. Okay, so the next step is to actually configure Visual Studio to build a project that incorporates Python. So Visual Studio has no concept of Python. It's a C++ compiler, so it doesn't know anything about Python. But what we can do is we can actually tell it where to find certain Python parts. And what it'll do is it'll actually build those parts. They're called libraries. It'll actually build those libraries into an executable. And it still doesn't know anything about the executable. It doesn't know anything, I'm sorry, about the Python, but this will let us actually run Python. So what we need to do is we need to tell Visual Studio where to find these Python components. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to right-click on the project name, which is CPP Python, and then we're going to go ahead and select the properties. Okay, so we want to change the properties of the project. So we talked about the directory structure for the Python installation, and there's 2 folders and 2 DLLs that we need to tell. Well, actually, the 2 folders that we need to tell Visual Studio about. The 2 DLLs we need, but Visual Studio actually doesn't care about them. So what we're going to do is, using the arrows below, we're going to point Visual Studio to the directory, to certain directories of our Python installation. And what will happen is when Python builds the executable, it's going to use the header so that it knows what the function declarations are, and then it's going to build the libraries that we're going to point it to. It's going to build those into the executable. Okay, so without going into full detail of what exactly a library is, you can think of a library as a partially compiled piece of code. So what happened is someone built this library so that you could use Python, and the way the library is sort of built, it allows you to include it into your project, and that's basically what you're doing. There's actually a lot more to that, and maybe that's something I can put together for later on. And then the DLLs you're going to use, because the library is only about half of the equation. The DLL stands for Dynamically Linked Library. It's another library, and it's also needed, but you're going to include the DLLs in a different way. This will all be covered in the video that I'm going over next. I just wanted to, at this point in time, what you want to do is get your Python Visual Explorer window up, and File Explorer, and be ready to point Visual Studio to those directories. Welcome back. So from your point of view, all this source code just magically appeared. I will provide this source code through some other means, putting it into slides and having you try to type it in, or type it in worse from a video isn't going to work. So I'll get you this code some other means. But basically what I have here is some code that will, some C++ code that's going to open up a Python module and call a function in a Python file. So just really quickly, the code, here's main. It calls Python. Python file is the name of the actual Python file, and hello world is the name of the function in the Python file. Okay, that's passed through here. And I'm actually going to go through the code in more depth at the end of the video. But for people who just want to get this project up and running, I'll go ahead and do that. But just keep in mind that based on the color coding here, I did put links for each function that's used if you want to learn more about the functions. Also, this code is heavily instrumented, so it pauses between each step, so you can sort of understand what's going on. Okay, but let's just okay. So let's say you got some C++ code and some Python code, and you want to get it to build. So now what we need to do is we need to configure the project to include the Python code. So there's 3 pieces here. So let's go ahead and try to build this. Okay, so oh no, look what happened. So first thing to notice is, I'm going to go ahead and do this. First thing to notice is that there are a lot of errors. Second thing to notice is that it failed. There's no executable. See, it doesn't report any executable. And you have all these errors. Now, why do you have these errors? Well, because the Visual Studio, the C compiler, the C++ compiler, has no idea what these functions are. It doesn't know anything about them. So, how do you tell C++ about functions? Well, you have to add an include. So in this case, what we're going to do is, from the previous video and from the previous slides, we need to include the Python.h. Okay, so if we go ahead and include Python.h, now if we go ahead and do a build, let's see what happens. Now you can right away you can tell something's wrong because it's highlighted this. See, you can't find it. So if we go ahead and do a build, what's going to happen is it's going to say, hey, I can't find this Python.h. Where is it? How does it know where it's at? Well, we know from the beginning, from earlier in the video, that Python.h is right here. Yeah, it's right down a little bit, right here. Okay, but we need to tell the tool that it's in this include directory, and the way we do that is we right-click on Python, on our project name, sorry, and we click on properties. Okay, now here is where you actually configure the project, and here in this include directories right here is we're gonna tell it where it can find this Python.h. So we go ahead and click on this little arrow thing over here. We click on edit. It pops up this other window here. And we click on this, we're going to add an entry, is what this is saying. And then when you go to add an entry, there are these little dots over here. This lets you select the entry, select the directory. So we go here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to this include. And if you remember, it was, what was it? It was C, users, in this case Eric Grigori, and then it was, if I recall, it was app data. Yeah, app data. And then it was local. And then programs. Now we're going to be navigating to this quite a bit. So, and then Python. And then in this case, it's Python 3.10 because that's what I'm using. Remember, I'm using the 64-bit version of Python. And then there's my include directory. Okay, now if I click into that include directory, it doesn't tell me anything. And that's unfortunate, but that's just the way it works. What you want to do is you want to actually just click on the include directory right there, and you want to say select that folder. Okay, and now what it did was it just updated that. It just added that entry in here, and you could actually just add that entry in there if you wanted to. It's just easier, I guess, especially in a video, to actually show the navigation. So now we go OK, and now see what it's done? It's actually added that entry in there. So now we've just told the tool, the compiler, where and look at that. There goes, remember to underline and include, now it's gone. So now the tool is saying, okay, I know where Python.h is, so let's see what happens when we build. Okay, so it didn't fail. It found Python.h, but I'm still getting all these warnings. And why am I getting all these errors and messages? Well, these happen to be something else, but it says right here, it's telling me what it can't do. Right there. it's saying, okay, well, I found the header, I found Python.h, but I couldn't find the actual code that goes with that header. So remember, the H file just describes the functions. The actual code behind the functions, in this case, is in something called a library. And you can just, I mean, at a high level, you can think of a library as just another file that contains all the code. In fact, it's actually a compiled file, but that goes into another realm of complexity. But let's just say what it's trying to do is it's trying to find this python310.lib. Okay, well, let's see. Here's our directory here. And let's see if we go into libs. Oh, look at that. There it is. So exactly what it's asking to find, we happen to know is right in this directory. So now we need to tell it where to find that. So we right-click on project again. We go to properties. And now in this case, this is library directories, which makes sense, right? You're looking for a library. So now we're going to go ahead and hold on. We're going to go ahead and select library directories. We're going to go right there. We're going to do the same thing with the little down arrow here. We're going to go ahead and hit edit. And then we're going to click on this add entry here. And we're going to go ahead and search for it again. So like I said before, you're going to be doing this one more time actually. So C users Eric Grigori. Of course, this is going to be your username, whatever that is. App data local, and it was what, programs, and then Python. Okay, and then we're at Python 3.10. So remember, it was in the libs directory that we wanted to point to. So if we look in here in the libs directory, that's where our file is. Again, unfortunately, if you click on the libs directory here, it doesn't tell you anything. That's unfortunate, actually. Okay, so what you want to do is select that folder. So we're going to select the libs folder. So highlight it, select the libs folder, and then we're going to say OK. Then we're going to apply it, and then hit. And then you can see here it pops up. It's pointing to the right place. OK. Now, let's see what happens when I do a build. And there it is. So it says, see, I have my executable, I've succeeded, and I'm in good shape. So I'm all ready to go. So this is exciting. Okay, so let's go ahead and if you remember the trick, if you right-click on this, now remember we did release x64, so that's going to tell us where our code is. So let's go ahead and right-click on this, and we're going to open folder in File Explorer. Okay, and this opens up the folder. So again, we're on release x64. So we go to x64, we go to release, and there's our executable. Let's see. And yeah, the executable, I always like to verify the time and date on the executable just to make sure it's the right one. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on the executable. Now, there's different ways to debug this. For this video, okay, so one way to debug this is to do this. Go to debug, start without debugging. Okay, but that, I don't particularly like that way. Only because it tends to hide some things that are going on in the background. But anyway, look what happened. Wait a minute, what happened? Our executable built, but yet it's still not working. Well, why isn't it working? Well, if you read the error, it says because it can't find a DLL. Now, DLL, it stands for Dynamically Linked Library. It's a Windows thing. Let's just say that the library is in two pieces. One piece is in a DLL, and the other piece is in that lib that we included earlier. Without going into full details, that's about what's going on. So this is another thing we need to do. Now, here's the interesting part. This isn't a dependency of the executable. The executable built, it worked just fine. So let me show you what's going on here. So I'm going to just hit OK, and I'm going to close out of this little window over here. And what I'm going to do instead of that is I'm going to right-click on here, open in File Explorer, here. Okay, so I'm going to go into what were we? Let's see, it says release, so we're going to go into release. Oh, whoops, I almost made a mistake. It says x64, so I'm going to go into x64, and then I'm going to go into release. Okay, so here's my executable. So now if I double click on that executable, look at that. Same thing. Okay, but here's where it gets pretty cool. Now watch this. Without rebuilding anything, okay, my executable stays the same. I could close Visual Studio right now if I wanted to, because the executable stays the same. All I'm going to do is take these two DLLs here, and I'm going to right click, copy them, and I'm going to copy them to the same directory as my executable. It's got to be in the same directory. Okay, same exact directory. So here's my executable, here's the directories, and here's the reason why I like to run this executable directly from the Windows Explorer, because it makes this a little bit more obvious and it makes it easier to understand exactly which executable you're running. So again, we're in the x64 release, and that matches up here, x64 release. Now if I click on the executable, my computer just, what's it doing? There it goes. So now if I click on the executable, lo and behold, I don't get that error anymore. See, the DLL isn't part of the executable build process. It's a separate thing. The DLL was built a long time ago. So you don't need to do a rebuild. You don't need to do anything. So this particular program that I have loaded up in here is an example program. So it actually pauses between each step. So here it says hit any key to initialize the Python interpreter. Okay, so we're going to hit any key. If you can't find the any key on your keyboard, I'm so sorry. Okay, so then what it does, it goes to the next step. It's going to say, okay, I'm going to try to load the Python file from this directory. Okay, we're going to go ahead and enter. Oh, it can't find a Python file because we haven't created it yet. So now it's going to fail. Okay, so it failed. It said, okay, I couldn't find a Python file. So now what we're going to do is we're going to verify. You need to go into this, click on View, and you want to verify that this file name extensions and hidden items boxes are checked. This is very important. So now what you're going to do is you're going to right click in this directory. I'm in the same directory as my executable. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say New, and I'm going to create a text document. I know this is, here, let me right click up here. This way it's, see, right click, New, text document. Okay, and I'm going to call that, what was it called? It was called Python file. Okay, now notice it says PythonFile.txt. Now the only reason it's showing me that .text is because I have this checkbox here. If you don't see that .text, it's because you didn't check this off. And remember, you go to View to find those checkboxes. So now you need to change this to .py. Now, when I hit enter, it's going to give me a message. If you don't see that message, then that means you did not select that. What it's telling me is it's saying, hey, you had a text file. Now you're trying to convert it to a Py file. Those are two different kinds of files. Are you sure you want to do this? And we're going to say yes. Now, on my system, I have the Py files associated with something called Sublime. So that's why this popped up like this. But it won't do that with yours. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, this is what I like to do. I take this file, this Python file, and I'm just going to drag it over into here. Okay, now what's really important to understand is this Python file here is not in any way part of your C++ project. All Visual Studio is doing is letting you edit it. It has absolutely, just because it's in the IDE here, it has absolutely no association with your project. And in fact, if you wanted to use a different editor, you could right click on this and open it up with a different editor. Now, one thing you want to be careful with is see, it's not going to show up on this one because it's Sublime. You want to be careful about how you open this, which editor you use. You want to make sure you have an editor that uses tabs spaces instead of tabs. That's critical because otherwise Python will not build. So like in this case, the Visual Studio editor, notice down here it says tabs. Yeah, that's bad. You want spaces. Huh. Spaces. Why did it say tabs? Let's see what happens when I get over here. Okay, so now we're going to cut and paste some code. I'm going to paste this in there. Now if I do this, let's see, spaces, there it goes. Yeah, you want to make sure this says spaces, and apparently it needs a file of some code in there. If you have tabs in this file, you will get all kinds of errors. So you want to make sure that this says spaces, or whatever editor you're using uses spaces instead of tabs. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now to save this, there's a couple of ways. The easiest way is to do Control S, but you can't see Control S. So I'm just going to say here, what I do is I clicked on File, Save Python.file. Okay, now I didn't rebuild, I didn't do anything. All I did was edit a file. Okay, so the executable, if you look at the date and time, well, you'll notice if you happen to catch it before, the executable has not changed. Nothing has changed. The only thing I changed was this Python file. So now let's go ahead and click on this executable. So now I'm going to go ahead there. It tells us what it's looking for. It's looking for Python.file in this directory, so we're looking good. It found the file. It found the module this time. Okay, that's a great shape. Oh, now what's wrong? Oh, now it can't find Hello World. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot to change the name of the function. So in my Python code here, I named the function Hello World. Okay, and if you want to know where that's at in here, it's this line right here, PyObject my function here. So what I need to do is change the name of my Python function to Hello World. So we're going to change this to Hello World, and then we're going to save it. In this case, I'm going to use Control S to save it just because it's faster. And we'll go back to the executable here. Again, I didn't rebuild, I didn't do anything. And now I'm just going to click on the exe again. And then I'm going to click. It found the module. Click. It found the address for Hello World. This is good. It found the function. And look at that. My code worked. Okay, so I know the audio is adjusting to my voice. I realized that after playing this back. Hopefully it's not too loud for you guys. So here's the code. Now again, don't try to type it in from here. I'll get it to you some other way. Basically the code. This code is actually designed specifically for helping you get the project set up, and in that, for that, also it's also designed to explain. A lot of students were asking, hey, what do those functions do? I went through the steps, but I don't really understand what's going on. So what I did was I provided links to each of the Python interface functions, and you can read the docs. They're very well documented. So the links are in in blue here, and that's why this is also cut and pasted as an image, because I wanted to color. The color coding helps a lot when trying to read this code. You also notice that since this is code to help debug and help set up the project, there's a lot of pauses in here. As a matter of fact, each step there's a pause, and that's because the way the Python functions work, sometimes they just fail, and it's really hard to tell what's going on. So what I did was I put a pause between each one so you can tell that, oh, it failed here, and hopefully provide some guidance to help you debug any issues. So here we start out. Now the most important thing here, well, there's two. The main, when we call this function, we're calling it with the module name, which is Python file here. Now notice there's no .py, so you don't add a .py here. And I'm going to explain that later when we get to the function. And then here's the actual Python function name. So here's the module name, Python file, and here's the function name, hello world. So that comes into here, and you can see it says Python module name, Python function name. All we do here is convert it. We basically we're just copying it into a variable here, and then we're going to pause. And then this PyInitialize actually initializes the Python interpreter. So it goes through, allocates memory for the Python interpreter, loads up whatever it needs into memory, and it's just like you had typed Python at the command line. And now after this runs, Python's up and running and ready to start accepting commands. So here's our PyInitialize. Here what we're doing is we're getting the current working directory. The purpose of this is to give you an idea of where this code is looking for certain files, specifically the Python module file. This also can come in handy later on if you need to look at where the code is looking for files that you've saved or files that you need to load. So this is a very handy little feature here. I'm using printf just because I write C code all day for my day job, and printf's a little bit just easier to remember. Printf though is similar to cout. Here what I'm doing is it's going to print out this first S and the second S is going to print out the current working directory here and the module name here. Then it's going to pause, and then what it's going to do is it's going to load the module into the Python interpreter. That's what this piece of code does right here. That's what this call does. So again, this would be just like loading doing an import in Python. So you're at, you use PyInitialize, now you're at a Python prompt. Now you type import a module. That's exactly what this is doing, but it's all doing it programmatically. This print error, if there is any error that this module creates, this print error will output that error and to help you debug. And then I pause. Now the reason I'm pausing is that C++ will normally just end. It would normally just stop execution, and that causes the console window to close. Pause actually holds the console window open so you can actually read the error. Then here I'm getting the so the way this works is Python maintains a list of all the function names in the module that you just loaded, and here I'm getting that module. So I'm going to look up that module. In that module, I'm going to look up the function name. So I'm going to try to find the function name in the module. And then if I find the function name, I assign it to this my function pointer, so I can call it later on. And then again, if there's any errors here, I print those errors. So finally, I go ahead. So here's that error that we saw from before. And if I found the function, I print function found. And I again give the function name in the current working directory. Now this argument here, or this Python call here, actually calls the function. So right here we're going to call the function. Now if you need to pass parameters or get parameters returned, there's additional calls you have to do around this. This is just calling the function. So we're going to go ahead and call the function, and if there's any errors in the function, we print out, Python calls it a trace, that's what this PyError is, so we print out a trace. And then here again there's a pause just because in case there's a failure you can read actually what the trace says before it disappears off the screen. And then finally we do this PyFinalize call. What this does is it cleans up memory, it unloads the interpreter, it basically brings you back to a known state. And that is basically the code. These deletes are just cleaning up memory that I allocated for the function name and the mod name. And that is the code. And if you have any other questions about the code, let me know. But I highly recommend reading those URLs because they do a very good job of describing how everything works. Plus, there's additional examples at the top. The first slide I showed, there's sort of an overall URL that explains the overall how everything works, and there's a bunch of examples in there that explains how everything works. So here are some common questions and the answer to those questions that come up for this particular project. The biggest one is a group policy blocking on a Porto. The instructions to use a Porto are included with the project, and in those instructions it tells you you have to use the U drive on a Porto. If you try to use the C drive, you'll get that error of the program is blocked by group policy. Now the next biggest one, and this is a big one, is students who want to do the project on a Mac. Unfortunately, I know nothing about Macs, and there's nothing I can do to help you out with that. The school policy is that if you can't do it on your local machine, you have to do it on a Porto. The project can be done on a Mac. Other students have done it on a Mac. It is possible. I just don't have the detailed instructions to do it on a Mac. Something to keep in mind with the Mac is that the Visual Studio, the free version of Visual Studio, does not support C++ on the Mac. Visual Studio Code does, but remember, Visual Studio Code doesn't come with the compiler. Now there are ways to make all this work with something called CLion, which is free, but again, I'm not an expert. Finally, as we discussed in the video, something that trips up students a lot is that Python does not like tabs. You got to make sure whatever editor you use to edit your Python code that you have it set for spaces as opposed to tabs. Also, Python is very sensitive to indentation, so make sure your indentation is set correctly. And finally, if you want to try to copy your previous projects, you can't. It's not actually very easy to do. All the project settings that you did are stored in various project setting files. And they tend to be directory dependent, so it's not easy to copy a project. And if you just copy your CPP file and your Py file, that's not going to work because none of those changes we made to point to those directories are stored in those files. They're stored in the project-specific files. So the easiest thing to do is honestly just reproduce what we went over when you want to create a new project, or just replace the CP, keep the same project and replace the CPP in the Py file. That's actually the absolute easiest thing to do.